Can you even imagine how family dinners have transformed over the past 100 years to what we see today? Well, I can tell you one thing. We've definitely gone through a lot of culinary makeovers. If you're interested in seeing just how drastically the menus have changed, then keep your eyes on the screen. I really doubt whether or not it is more American than a pot roast with root vegetables, no matter what part of the country you find yourself in. Whether you're down in the South, freezing up north, or sitting comfortably somewhere in the Pacific and Midwest, this was simply a recipe you could never escape. And the further back you go in our country's history, the more true you'll find that statement to be. If we dial the clock back all the way to the 1910s, we'll find out how this recipe played a key part in World War I, too. It was a bad period for the economy, and I'll be honest with you, lots of people just weren't making ends meet and were living off of leftovers. It was a bleak situation, and people were pretty much on their last wits by the tail end of it. In that period, pot roasts that were made from tough and less expensive beef cuts, such as briskets or bottom rounds, became an ideal and affordable option to go for. Most families opted to take full advantage of the pricing and make a pot roast out of it, something that would not only feed the whole family, but also last a while since it was being supplemented with root vegetables. You didn't need to use all the meat you just bought. There were other things that could serve as a sideshow in the dish. Plus, I really can't oversell the nutritional value here. It has everything you need, from vitamins and carbohydrates to protein, fat, and fiber. If you wanted to eat well and still take care of everyone's dinner for the next couple of days, then a pot roast was the way to go. See, eventually though, people would lean even more towards vegetable-based diets, with things like potato soups and corned beef becoming much more common. The idea was that it was significantly easier to prepare, and large-scale meals and roasts like this started to take the back seat in the national conversation for food. It was a little sad to see, but this definitely had a pretty fair run. Plus, it's not like it vanished completely. It just became more of a specialty dish that you'd cook once in a while when a nostalgic craving was eating away at you, rather than a daily meal. Prawn cocktails and seafood had pretty much a similar backstory. Thanks to the economic boom that followed the First World War in the 1920s, more and more Americans were able to afford better quality seafood, and that too a lot more often. Prawn was always something that was accessible to the general public because it was never considered a luxury or premium meat, but it was still a little up there depending on the quality of the catch. Also, it was mostly used in fine dining, which hadn't really become a nationwide phenomenon, at least not until the 1920s took off properly. In large-scale cities, you eventually had places for fine dining opening up. New York, San Francisco, and Chicago became the go-to spots for that kind of stuff, with each restaurant filled with even more dazzling lights than the last. Often, these places would serve prawn cocktails and seafood, all of it being fresh and sourced from the finest fishermen in the various coastal cities across America. It got even easier to do all this once the technology for refrigeration became a proper thing. Since then, people no longer had to rely on little ice boxes to keep their seafood cold and fresh. Cocktail parties also could happen a lot more often, given how much easier it was to store fish now. People managed a lot differently just 100-odd years ago, which might seem long when you hear about it, but this is probably the only time in history where there's been this much of a change in daily living. Anyway, cocktail parties were one of the hallmarks of your average 1920s social planner. These would always come loaded with all the lobster, crab, oysters, and prawn you could buy, and people would definitely indulge. Plus, the biggest benefit of all that new freezing technology was that you no longer had to live in a coastal city to enjoy seafood. Thanks to all of it, non-coastal cities could import their fish and keep it frozen and fresh for whenever they needed it. It was a great time to be alive and experience the wonders of refrigeration. Still, the prawn cocktail couldn't keep up with all the emerging food trends that went into foreign cuisines, French cooking, and a massive reliance on modern technology. Not that the prawn cocktail couldn't be adapted around these, but new dishes came along that became trendy status symbols, and the prawn cocktail took a bit of a back seat, though it's still always going to be a sign of the flair of the 1920s, especially on any retro menu. A cocktail's nice, especially if it's pretty and fancy looking, but it doesn't fill up the whole family. For that, let's take a look at mulligan stew, specifically the one you'd get in the Depression era. This hearty dish, which was known for always making ends meet and ensuring that nobody went to bed hungry, became a staple of Depression-era cooking. It was noted for its resourcefulness and how it emphasized making a lot out of several ingredients, thereby saving most of them rather than using all of one ingredient. It also helped strengthen its case when people realized this was a communal meal and could often be prepared by an entire neighborhood together. Camps for homeless people also relied on this recipe, using whatever ingredients they could source or scavenge. There was a massive focus on communal eating and cooking thanks to the Depression, even though the trend and norm before this was that people would usually eat in the comfort of their homes and dining tables. People realized that everyone's supplies were lasting way longer if they just pooled their food together to cook, and dishes like this, which were so easy to make in bulk, were favored for that kind of cooking. Mulligan stew could really be made with whatever you had on hand, but it was common to use potatoes, onions, turnips, and cabbage. And as far as the protein went, any bits of ham would do. That was at least still one thing that was somewhat reasonably priced. As things settled down, though, and as homeless culture, which had been a trademark of the 20th century during the Depression, faded away, the need for this dish also died down. People also started to associate it with the harshness they experienced during the Depression. People can switch up on you so quickly. Just a few years ago, they were relying on this to have a comfortable day. Also, it didn't help that supermarkets and urban centers were expanding. People didn't need to rely on scraps anymore, since these markets often had individual ingredients available for great prices. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Victory Garden vegetable soup was such a regular in American households, especially during the entire period surrounding World War II in the 1940s. It focused on thrifting ingredients, being resourceful, and also had a bit of a patriotic touch to it. Wartime rationing by this point was the norm in the United States, and American governments were pushing for victory gardens as much as they could. They were urging their citizens to grow as much of their own produce as possible so that food supplies could be supplemented and that the burden from the agricultural industry could be eased. A lot of farms and their harvests had been thoroughly exhausted already just to sustain the amount of soldiers they were sending out. Thanks to all that, vegetable soups became one of the most common, practical, and easy ways to feed a family and get nutrition at the same time. The soup itself, after all, took next to nothing. You could use whatever combination of vegetables you had on you, which could have been things like leafy greens, root vegetables, legumes, or whatever else. Spinach, kale, peas, carrots, onions. Anything works here. The idea was just to grow it on your own, hence the entire concept of a victory garden. And that wasn't exactly something new either. Thanks to the Depression, a lot of people had already gotten into backyard gardening because it was not only much cheaper to grow your own food, but then you could also barter it with other people for different things. Needed a new pair of boots? Barter some crop you just grew. It was actually a very clever and smart way to live, and the government knew exactly what kind of environment the people were just coming out of and took full advantage. Thankfully, once all the war efforts died down, the trend of relying on vegetable soup for your lunch and dinner did too. During the war, around 20 million victory gardens were reported to have been planted across America, and they ended up selling most of the country's produce. Above 40%, in fact. After the war, people mostly abandoned these gardens, and urbanization meant that most Americans were going to cities and suburbs, not places with space for gardening. Overall, this dish really represents the kind of smartness you needed when it came to managing resources if you were living in the period between the 30s and 40s. And if you check out some of our videos around the era, you can find out other aspects of Depression-era cooking that are pretty similar to this. Mushroom bourguignon was supposed to be a vegetarian interpretation of the French classic boeuf bourguignon, but it didn't exactly rise to fame immediately in the 1950s. But it is the dish that best represents the culinary trends that were dominating that time period. French cuisine had gained notoriety that it hadn't ever possessed before. People were giving it looks and stares, wondering what other marvel of cooking this cuisine has for it. From wine reductions to nifty sauces the American palate couldn't even dare to dream of, French cooking was captivating people, and for good reason. Then you had people like Julia Child, who would only push for French cooking harder and harder. In fact, she was a fan of traditional French cooking, so I'm not even sure if she would have agreed with a mushroom bourguignon because it is a little out of convention. However, that's exactly why it's such a good idea for the 1950s. This was an era that was slowly turning the table and flipping the script on the global conversation as far as food was concerned in America. We had already given enough space and time to meatloafs, pot roasts, and pies. What else was out there on the horizon? And how well could it work with what was already here? Questions like these were on the minds of every American, and they wanted to know what other foods were available in the world. The mushroom bourguignon, being both a staple of French cooking as well as an unconventional take on the dish with an American spin to it, perfectly represents the kind of themes you'd expect to find in a 1950s cookbook. It has aromatics such as onion, garlic, and carrots for the base, with a mix of button mushrooms, usually wild ones or cremini mushrooms, and a large focus on beef stock. You would normally think a vegetable stock would go well here, but that wasn't too available in the 1950s. For the wine, a Burgundy or any other dry red wine worked well for the sauce. Some of this is proper and according to French standards, but some has definitely been influenced by the American way of doing things, and that's the best way to summarize any recipe that comes out of the 1950s. Casseroles can almost be considered an emblem of American values and family dining. They're practical, they're affordable, and they fit in with most of what the period had to offer in terms of food. It was convenient, comforting, and a cheap way to feed families in a post-war economy that wasn't too kind to the middle class. This was a decade filled with expanding and ever-growing suburbs and urban city centers, processed foods taking over, and a massive focus on making cooking easier and more efficient. To that end, you might be wondering what a casserole is doing here, since it doesn't really sound easy to make or convenient. Well, the thing was, the 1960s was the rise of a lot of things, and one of those was that, more than ever before, there was an extremely large amount of women who were choosing to go to work rather than stay at home. Since that was a first-time thing for a lot of jobs and families, it meant that there was a bit of a void left in terms of the dynamics of the household. If both the parents were doing the working, then who was doing the cooking? I mean, let's be real. The boys were never raised to know their way around a kitchen, and most of them never took an interest in it either, even after marriage. The responsibility, as per usual, fell on those same women. But they had to play it smart and not work even harder. This is why two things found space to shine like they never had before. Those two things were, namely, casseroles and convenience food. A lot of convenience, processed and pre-packaged or pre-made stuff was specifically targeted at this kind of family. The family had the mother working part-time shifts while the dad came home late at night from a full-time one. It meant that things needed to be prepared in advance, and this is why casseroles were the perfect pick. You could fit them perfectly into your busy schedule, bake them quickly, and prepare them a day or hours ahead of when you needed to eat them. Plus, all kinds of casseroles could be made easily using pre-prepared or canned ingredients. All you had to do was assemble and bake them, and these ingredients were a lot more affordable and sustainable as a daily option thanks to the fact that both parents were now working. Then you add in televisions to the mix, since a lot of Americans are really beginning to adopt television culture. You come home after a long day of work. All you want to do is relax with your television and casserole, and I'm sure we've all been there. These traits and qualities are the best things to have come out of the 1960s, and casseroles were the one dish that put together all of them in one, which is why it's the dish of the decade for us. If casseroles and their practicality were the defining characteristic of the 1960s, then fondue nights and their extravagance have to be the calling cards of the 70s. These nights reflected a mix of exploring new avenues when it came to cuisine, finding new ways of social connection after a traumatic first half of the century, and a fascination with casual eating that was also pretty interactive. Basically, the kind of meal you can have a chat over. Fondue was really something that came out of Switzerland as a regional dish, but when it hit American soil, it became something entirely different and took on a new life as one of the best ways to host a party. Fondue parties were relaxed. They let people feel casual in their socializing, but still had enough of an atmosphere that it made you feel like you got up and out for a real party. They were also glamorous and a little extra unnecessarily, but that's exactly what the 1970s were about. Fondue was something that brought communities together because it was something you'd always enjoy with other people. Sharing some melted cheese, chocolate, and mushrooms with people was a low-effort meal that allowed you to enjoy some casual fun while hanging out and meeting new people. It was really just one of the best ways to go out into the town and get to know someone new. Plus, everyone was in on it. That's how trends work, isn't it? Then you also had the commercial side of things pushing the trend further. Fondue pots became common and usually went on sale, wanting to ride the wave of the trend as far as they could. Soon, every neighborhood in the suburbs and cities had their own fondue setup, and it meant that hosting home parties was easier than ever, too. The 70s definitely continued what the 60s started in terms of wanting to favor convenience-based food, and the entire shift in labor and employment norms wasn't something that went away either. But that's also why fondues still worked perfectly in this kind of America. They were convenient, super easy to make, required next to nothing ingredients-wise, and they were extremely customizable. You could have so many kinds of dips, and you could play around with dozens of different ingredients. It was the first time that there was such a focus on simply having fun with an easy-to-make meal, rather than going all out for a main course, a side, and dessert to impress everyone at the table. Community socializing, nights spent out with lights and your best outfits, this is what made fondue nights what they were and why they're so commonly associated with the 1970s. It was just something you really had to be there for. Sloppy Joes, on the other hand, were exactly the opposite. They were still centered around convenience too, but they were doubling down on the family appeal aspect of things. This was just casual dining at its best, really. It represented a cheap and kid-friendly option that could work for adults too, which is why it was so popular with and specifically targeted at families. Sloppy Joes actually go back way further than the 1980s, since they were a thing around the start of the 20th century too. By the 1980s, there was an extreme need for casual, pre-made meals like Sloppy Joes. The reason was that dual-income households became pretty much the standard for American homes, and that meant that nobody had the time or energy to prepare lavish casseroles and elaborate meatloafs anymore. What you could get from the street or a local deli nearby had to cut it. Otherwise, good luck. Sloppy Joes could be made in just a single pan using cheap, everyday ingredients like ground beef and other vegetables and condiments. It was a dish that, for the most part, took care of everything you needed. You had your portion size being accurate for one person. It had the nutrition most people were looking for, at least. It had as much as a lazy one-pan dish could have, and it tasted pretty amazing. Plus, here's some extra points to make its resume stronger. Sloppy Joes were stupidly easy to carry around in tin foil or a lunchbox, which meant that both of the now working parents could simply assemble one, eat it on their way to work, or take it along as lunch. If not that, then they could just eat it and unwind with their favorite TV show. This is what life was like in the 80s, and Sloppy Joes summarize that perfectly. They represent an era where the emphasis was on getting by the day and lasting out your shift, and whatever helped you do that. Whether it was the promise of a 7 p.m. sitcom, the comfort of a Sloppy Joe, or the adrenaline rush from a strong cup of Joe, people relied on it. Gazpacho andaluz, also known as chilled tomato soup, is right out of the heart of southern Spain and perfectly encapsulates the culinary trends that dominated the 1990s. So this was an era all about soul-searching, but in the cooking sense. Right now, Americans are redefining their cultural and culinary identity. They had become tired of the double cheese hamburgers and the deep dish pizzas and including bacon in every single thing they made. Americans decided that it was time for something new, and the best place to start would be cultures around them, because inspiration never hurt anybody, right? Also, those doctors' reports were pretty concerning. Such a spike in childhood obesity sent the nation into a health craze, as more and more people were vouching for less fat in their regular diets, choosing to abandon heavily cream-based recipes and incorporating greener ones that used lean meats. So, Where does gazpacho andaluz come into all that? Well, the 1990s had a boom in terms of Mediterranean diets. There was a new focus like never before, which was all about fruits, vegetables, and fresh herbs, which was pretty much the entire job description for gazpacho andaluz. Plus, health professionals also began to shill their support for diets like this, claiming that the benefits for the heart, gut health, and your general immune system were unmatched. The 1990s explored many kinds of cuisines, Spanish and Mediterranean ones being only a few of them, but these were some of the most popular aspects of those styles of cooking that stuck around with Americans. Traditionally, authentic gazpacho andaluz would always feature a large amount of green peppers, cucumbers, garlic, vinegar, and tomatoes, and it was also to be served chilled after being garnished with diced vegetables, croutons, or some olive oil. Modern chefs in the 1990s began to experiment with different ways of making gazpacho, such as using cantaloupes, roasted peppers, or even seafood. Some of these variations focused more on exploring new flavors and combinations that could only be reached by using familiar ingredients in the format of a gazpacho, and some focused more on presentation, choosing to serve the soup in elegant glasses. It was always an appetizer, but it was a pretty good one, especially since there was a big rise in health-focused cafes that served things like this. It shows that the 1990s had a commitment to seeing how other cultures took care of their health and a dedication to learning from them. The 2000s, however, had the most in common with the 70s more than anything else. This was a wacky era, mostly because it did definitely have its fair share of problems, but it also was the first time people were having that much fun again. Taco nights in the 2000s were really just something you had to be there for. It let everyone build a meal they enjoyed, kind of like how hot pot culture is today. Basically, every time you went out for taco nights, it was like playing Legos with your food. You could arrange, build, and prepare your meal however you wanted, meaning that it was the absolute perfect thing to do with a group. Nobody was going to taco nights alone. It was always big families and groups of friends, since the entire nature of the event and meal was to be as interactive as possible. The 2000s were filled with things like that. Hands-on activities that really had you taking part in whatever you had come for, not just being a passive observer or watcher. Tex-Mex culture had popped off like never before, especially Mexican-inspired dishes, which experienced a nationwide surge in popularity that they never had before. I guess you could credit that to fast food chains like Chipotle and Wendy's or Qdoba, but the mainstream success of Mexican food isn't something you can put out of the conversation either. Tacos, especially, were a gateway dish, since not only were they delicious, really similar to wraps, which Americans were already familiar with, and easy to prepare and make, they were also the most represented. Everyone had grown up seeing tacos in movies and hearing about them or seeing ads for them. Plus, brands like Old El Paso and Ortegao made taco night extremely easy for people. They started selling taco kits with pre-seasoned packets of spice, taco shells, and their own custom taco sauce so that people could have DIY nights at home when they didn't feel like going out. Lots of different parts of American culture and a lot of different brands came together to make this a decade-defining phenomenon that basically replaced ice cream parlors and soda fountains as the new hub for social activity. Not only that, it was also a lot healthier than what Americans were used to, since nothing about a taco was too greasy or fattening. Mexican culture only expanded after that, and more regional ingredients that only locals would know about, like pico de gallo and cotija cheese, started to become popular, which really showed how much people were getting into the whole thing. The fun has to end sometime, or at least in this case, die down just a little bit. By the 2010s, rotisserie chicken with sides became the next popular food trend that was slowly beginning to dominate the entire nation. That's because families found themselves busier than ever, and even the people who wanted a quick and easy dinner solution with a homemade aspect to it wanted to make things as convenient as possible. To that end, rotisserie chicken was the perfect option to go for. It was a high-quality pre-cooked meal, and it was versatile, affordable, and most importantly, a real time saver. In the 2010s, time was quite literally money, as I'm sure most of you remember. Work weeks were getting harder than ever, and a new variety of jobs that were never there before were popping up thanks to all the advancements in technology that the country was going through. A rotisserie chicken had pretty much the answer to all those concerns. This thing came cooked and ready to eat, and yes, I am talking about an entire chicken. That made it unrivaled as far as convenience food was considered, and not just for families, but for everybody. Even single people who just wanted a quick diner could enjoy a hot and fresh rotisserie chicken without needing to spend hours in the kitchen preparing and cooking it. Plus, despite the sheer value and size, it was extremely affordable. This meant that it was a really budget-friendly option that could feed an entire family of 5 for a pretty decent price and even leave you with leftovers. Plus, the versatility was unmatched here. If you were just heating up and eating it, I wouldn't blame you, but with the leftovers, you could make sandwiches, wraps, or even use them for taco nights. Seriously, it was that easy. Rotisserie chickens were the definition of utility, and they were also pretty easy on the health aspect too. I mean, it was definitely better to make this than to waste your money ordering McDonald's for the 5th time in a week. Many grocery marts also offered discount deals on their rotisserie chickens and made it one of their priority products. Also, thanks to delivery services like Uber Eats and Grubhub, which were entirely things that came along with the 2010s, convenience food was easier than ever to get for yourself. You could simply order an entire rotisserie chicken from the comfort of your soda, which really made it unbeatable and hard to resist. People wanted ethical, easy, and clean food, and rotisserie chickens were the perfect example of that, which is why I think they're the best dish to associate with the 2010s, which was one of the busiest decades we've had in a while. In 2020, there was a big focus on comfort food rather than practical food, and that's because we found ourselves in one of the most confusing decades in recent history. Pastas have always been a staple of American kitchens, and that's only become more and more true since we did all that deep diving into French and Italian cuisine in the 1980s and 1990s, which further solidified their place as a mainstay. We were introduced to all kinds of pastas we've never even dreamt of before, and of course, that would mean that subsequent decades would have a pretty big itch that only pastas could scratch. So, the stage had pretty much been set for these to be the poster boy for comfort food. Now, how do you solidify that to make them the undisputed top dog of a decade? Well, we're about to hit 2025, and I don't see the Pasta Express train stopping anytime soon, so I think it's safe to say their chokehold on this decade will last. How did that happen? I'd be a liar if I said the pandemic had nothing to do with it, mostly because you can't speak about 2020 and onwards at all without mentioning the pandemic, because what was left unaffected by it, really? Not a thing. Pastas were seen as the #1 comfort food to make during the pandemic, which was a pretty alienating time where everyone was locked in the confines of their homes, their social batteries decaying, all their fall and spring plans going down the drain, and all their best fits rotting away as they worked from home and prayed they wouldn't catch COVID. That was the best, by the way, and if that's how your pandemic went, consider yourself lucky. For others, the threat of COVID was pretty severe, especially for people who repeatedly caught in, and all of this, pasta continued to be a source of comfort for many. It was seen as an easy-to-make dish that you could prepare at home, and it had enough versatility that it could appeal to anyone's tastes. With a massive range of flavor profiles available to you and every ingredient you'd ever need ready to be yours at the tap of a screen, it's no wonder how pasta became a fun new pandemic hobby for people. A lot of people simply spent their days trying out new recipes, getting deeply into cooking, and rediscovering their love for creative recipes that test their culinary chops. Whether it was for comfort or as a way to get back into a hobby, pastas were a beloved aspect of the pandemic and one that really helped get a lot of people to the next week. Also, the entire social media aspect made it so much easier for this to take off as a trend. I mean, in general, you could say that about a lot of things, since the way trends work and how fast they even happen is a lot different than it used to be, and that's entirely thanks to social media. Still, people would love to go on TikTok or Instagram with whatever new pasta they cooked up and post about it, curating their own little food pages and blogs. It was a good way to pass the time and, more importantly, to keep your sanity sane. Plus, nobody ever complained about leftover pasta, right? Chicken divan with rice was one of the true comfort food legends, one of the tasty casseroles that turned simple ingredients into stunning creamy and cheesy dishes. The gentle flavor of chicken, the texture of broccoli and rice gave it more of a homely appeal, serving the tummies of many at low prices. Chicken divan is said to have evolved its name from the Divan Parisien restaurant in New York. This dish is also called different depending on the restaurant serving style, but in the casserole form, it is cheaper and more suitable for families. Many recipes also include a creamy sauce, typically made from a portion of sherry or a canned soup like cream of chicken soup, which contributes greatly to its delicious warm flavor. Most cheese, the cheddar in particular, is added on top and it browns and crisps, then chars just a bit, making it so irresistible. Though it is not the hit that it used to be when we wanted something fast, chicken divan with rice fills people with warm emotions associated with everyday dinners and family events. They are a pretty basic meal when it comes to homely food that is both full-flavored and satisfying. This has got to be one of the easiest dishes to prepare. Watch this again, and you will understand why it was once popular. Comfort in a bowl. It's like being wrapped up in a warm blanket with your favorite smell and taste as the bonus. If you've never tried, chitlins are just out of the conversation for most modern tastes and populations. I'm going to give you a minute to guess what these are before I drop it on you, so let me know your best guess in the comments. Anyway, I'm not sure how close all of you'll get or how many of you know, but these are pig intestines. Don't worry, they have to go through a pretty top-notch cleaning process, so you don't have to worry about your intestines while you chow down. They get fried or simmered with an assortment of vegetables like garlic, thyme, parsley, and oregano, and lots of garlic and spices. These have a really strong fragrance, so they became a community dish or a famous go-to for potlucks. You always knew when someone was making chitterlings because you could quite literally smell it a block away. It's a dish with a lot of tradition. It's very precious to the African American communities in the South. It's one of those dishes that symbolizes heritage to them, and it's probably because the entire practice and recipe were more or less exclusively theirs. A community secret, one that you could get if you were well accepted in your local space, but something you wouldn't know about otherwise. There's also some rich history here. It's said that back in the days of rampant slavery, the very leftovers of the pig would be given to plantation workers, as it wasn't fit for the owners. That's sort of how a lot of them got used to it, and they reclaimed a painful piece of the past by making it a community dish that their kids happily grew up on, this time in their own homes and not plantations. Something that even predates African American and European influence in the South are all the marks that the Native American people have left on the cooking. Shrimp Creole rice, you're missing out on a bowl of pure Southern comfort. This dish is inspired by Louisiana and is intense, piquant, and full of shrimp meat, wrapped in rice. This is a show of goodies, such as tomatoes, bell peppers, onions, cloves of garlic that transform into a sauce with just the right hint of spiciness that coats the rice. Shrimp Creole used to be on dinner tables across the country as it brought the taste of the South to homes. Real quick, if you're loving this content as much as we loved making it, hit subscribe to stay connected and help us reach even more amazing folks like you. Let's get back to the topic. Here's a little fun fact. This is actually food from the French, Spanish, African, and Native American Creole communities, so this dish is multicultural fusion at its best. As far as heat goes, they are not shy with their spice, but all their food can be made as mild as you wish depending on the amount of hot sauce added. Shrimp Creole rice proved popular as it was comfort food, warm and filling, which appealed to anyone who adored seafood, hoping to momentarily transport ourselves to Cajun state and its unique culinary traditions without stepping out from the kitchen. Take this back to your family dinner table and take your palate for a quick ride to the Louisiana marshlands. Just pair it with cornbread or a hint of lemon, and you have a dinner that will transform anything into a mini Mardi Gras. Yeah, so I really wasn't lying when I said there was borderline fanatic behavior surrounding corn. A corn cult, if you will. One of the best dishes to come out of all that love for corn was corn pone, which was this southern bread that was made entirely of cornmeal, water, and salt. This didn't need the Depression to build a portfolio for it. It literally has a century-old reputation as being one of the most economical and delicious breads you can make, and once again, it comes from the earliest parts of our history. Namely, the time when Native American traditions and cuisines reigned supreme. Corn was such a massive part of the diet of indigenous people back then that even when the settlers did eventually come, they were overtaken by the sheer abundance of corn-based recipes and farming practices. Corn pone was a wonderful way to extend the use of your cornmeal and get a lot more bang for your buck. It's been a staple of American cooking for centuries, and while nowadays we might prefer the baguette over the soup, it helps to remember the things this country has cultivated on its own. Something about appreciating and inheriting what culture we do have, you know? Plus, it always helps when interacting with history comes with an affordable price. It really does show the difference between how much times have changed, though. The South of today isn't somewhere you'd find things like this, with a much bigger focus on protein and extravagant fancy roasts and casseroles now. You had a lot more kinds of corn-based breads than just pones to pass the day with and dip in soups and stews. Spanish rice with sausage was the magnum opus in giving families of the 70s a full taste of flavor. This dish added a sprinkle of exotic to the American dining table with tasty sausage, beautiful bell peppers, and warm rice all in a huge pot. It was like paella's laid-back neighbor, trendy, casual, and cheap, but with substance, where paprika and garlic made things a little more interesting. A little like a Tex-Mex feast, this was frequently served with a garnish of raw tomatoes or a little sprinkle of cheese. This food increased the liveliness of otherwise monotonous weeknight meals. Spanish rice with sausage wasn't exactly Spanish and wasn't quite Mexican. It was its own American fusion recipe, created to please everyone's palate without requiring exotic ingredients. For busy families, it was a lifesaver. It was filling, cost-effective, and tasty, able to attract even the toughest customer to the table. But slowly and gradually, when hurried dinners and orders started to pop up, this once bright dish was slowly set aside. A traditional recipe that hit the tables in the Victorian era, this dish just might earn a place back on your table. Chicken bog. But do not worry, it is not as swampy as it sounds. Chicken bog casserole is a lot like a delicious soup of tender chicken, scrumptious sausage, and the mouth-watering rice it is made from. It's, if you will, the complete opposite of the casserole version of a Southern comfort hug that this soup is on paper. My grandma prepared chicken bog for each family reunion, and there each time members used to like it. According to legend, it is named bog because of its heavy texture. This stuff makes you bogged down with delight. They tell me it's a lot like jambalaya or gumbo, but, you know, neater or more scoopable, and it's all cooked in casserole. That's because chicken bog is a homegrown South Carolina lowcountry dish that was once cooked during large events for extended families. There are many directions to achieving the perfect chicken bog, but the key to the dish is the chicken broth that reabsorbs into the rice and sausage. And did you know that this particular meal is believed to be a descendant of southern rice plantations, making it all the more interesting in terms of history? Just a heads up, it is not for the faint of heart, literally and figuratively. This is essentially a hearty casserole sort of dish, and those who are reading this and planning to prepare it might find themselves serving. It's classic Southern soul food and great for big gatherings of family or just for a family movie night kind of night. Eggplant is one of those foods people either love or don't like at all. So if something could turn an eggplant hater into a lover, it would be this creamy and cheesy casserole. Coined eggplant and cheese casserole is your average comfort food with the addition of green vegetables. Eggplant is cut lengthwise into thick pieces, sautéed until soft, and then enjoyed between tall heaps of melted and stringy cheese. This isn't just any casserole, it's almost like lasagna, only it took a walk through the garden first. The eggplant makes it rather hearty, and the cheese then ties the whole dish into a wonderful, smooth delight. Plus, eggplants are technically berries, so if you make this casserole, you're getting your daily dose of fruit. As a Southern casserole-style dish, it delivers hearty, full-bodied flavors that are filling but slightly better for you than many others. For the right type of texture, my grandmother added a pinch of salt to the eggplant slices to draw out any excess water, and that is essential for avoiding a soggy casserole. You should try this one. It perfectly shows that eggplant and cheese are actually the stars of dinner. Hoppin' John casserole isn't just food, it's practically a lucky charm in casserole form. And as my grandma would say, this Hoppin' John casserole will bring good luck in any form. This is a traditional New Year's Day dish in the South meals that contains black-eyed peas, rice, and sausage, and eating it is said to bring good luck for the year. My grandma prepared it every New Year without exception, and she believed that it would actually help lay us a prosperous new year. Traditionally, Hoppin' John was a simple one-pot dish, and the casserole version takes that classic up a notch. Black-eyed peas supposedly represent coins, and eating them was believed to bring wealth and fortune. While I haven't exactly become a millionaire from it, I can say it's one of the most comforting dishes around. Tastes are rich with every grain and every chew, with the smallest hint of smoke and a lot of meatiness. My grandma would put green bell peppers and onions in it to spice it up, though it was close to being a jambalaya casserole. But the smell alone is well worth making this dish, and it is like a little piece of Southern hospitality wafting up from the oven. Whether it brings luck or a great dinner, Hoppin' John casserole is a must-try for anyone who loves Southern comfort with a bit of tradition. Wild rice and mushroom casserole. A great dish for those who want to prepare a warm and earthy casserole full of forest atmosphere deliciousness. Produced from wild rice, tasty, crunchy, and cocktails made from non-rice plant, which grows both in water and on land, it was a status meal in American homes in the 70s, especially for those who preferred mushrooms. Wild rice was considered gourmet, associated with health and nature at the time when other people turned to the health reform movement. Eaten together with mushrooms, which give that extra depth of flavor and umami texture, it was rich and ideal for winter when everyone wants something lusciously generous. Wild rice and mushroom casserole was, again, not your run-to-the-mill sort of dish. It was for people who preferred only the unconventional and people with a hankering for mushrooms. At its best, this casserole is simple in the best sense, which is to say it has remarkably few ingredients. Although it has gone out of fashion, it should be reinvented for anyone who enjoys wild rice, mushrooms, and nostalgia in addition to the dish. Try this earthy flavored meal, and you might end up with a brand new comfort food. Country Captain casserole, folks. More than just tender chicken combined with curry powder, tomatoes, and bell peppers, this dish gives quite a punch to the typical casserole recipes. My grandma received this recipe from a family friend who passed the word that it was prepared in honor of a British sea captain. If this is indeed a banana that tastes this exotic, then you can bet your bottom dollar that I do believe it. This casserole is like taking a little break from daily work and life to go on a southern vacation. It is welcoming, comforting, and rather mildly exotic. The sweetness of the bell peppers and spicy curry powder was perfect, but I brought the flavor down just a tad with the southern comfort of chicken and rice. Also, each time you decide to take a bite, it will be soft rice, tender chicken, and that sauce with the tingle of spiciness. It's one of those casseroles where you keep returning for the next serving because it has an entirely different flavor in the mouth. If you are bored with the same chicken casserole recipe, this one will have your taste buds alive, and maybe even your sense of adventure. You might just find yourself craving a little captain in your life. Cornbread dressing casserole in its essence is Thanksgiving, all wrapped up in a serving dish, and as far as I'm concerned, that's the essence of comfort food. Here's a recipe that throws out every conventional rule on stuffing: bake cornbread with sausage, celery, and lots of chopped herbs. And this casserole is terrific, moist and savory. My grandma always said the secret was just a bit more sage and butter, and who am I to disagree? This casserole is exactly the side dish that becomes the star in the spotlight. Well, it almost feels like it is made of cornbread, but it's even tastier than that bread. Oh, don't get the idea that it's reserved for Thanksgiving alone. Down south, we serve this anytime we want comfort food, or, let's be honest, a heavy meal. Sausage is smoky and salty, which complements with sweet cornbread to create a beautiful union in the flavor profile. It is the kind of casserole that you could take on its own, or have it alongside anything in the world. Trust me, once you try cornbread dressing casserole, regular stuffing won't ever be enough. It's like a warm, herby hug in every bite. chicken and rice casserole with mushroom soup is actually one of those dishes that can be served in the South no matter the year or the occasion. This is comfort food at its most simple and delicious. Fresh, tender chicken and creamy rice which coordinates with a delicious mushroom soup. Oh yes, the aroma of this was amazing. My grandma used to cook this every Sunday, and the smell could make me feel everything was fine in the world. That creaminess is what this dish is all about. The mushroom soup gives it a little earthy flavor, and when you mix it all up, you get a casserole that's creamy, savory, and oh so satisfying. Basically, it's soup for your stomach, but in a baked, creamy form that everyone will just absolutely love. As you might have already guessed, this casserole is a family favorite for a very good reason. It is delicious, hearty, and the sort of food that leaves you craving just one more bite. I have to insist you give it a try if you're anything like me and love simple comfort food. This casserole is going to become a staple very soon. Oh, it's like that candy that reminds you of your childhood. Tomato aspic looked beautiful on the table. Tomato aspic is basically just this gelatin mold that makes use of tomato sauce, gelatin, and things like Worcestershire sauce, hot sauce, and celery or hard-boiled eggs. As you can probably imagine, this gives it a whirlwind of flavors to work off of, but it also makes it really pretty to look at. You gotta think from an aesthetic point of view. The striking red of the tomato soup, the shiny glisten of the Jell-O, all mixed together and complemented perfectly by the softness of that yellow egg and the greens. It had a lot going on, and it was one of those dishes where your eye immediately went to it and you would be like, "What's this?" Hence why this became so popular, especially for potlucks and family gatherings. Never let a chance to impress those in-laws slip away, right? While the dish might be forgotten by the larger public now, it'll never really slip away from our hearts. Tomato aspic is an amazing side, and that's a hill I'll readily die on. Plus, that little topping of sour cream at the very end was to die for. I mean, this dish really had a lot going for it. You could enjoy mushrooms with eggs in one bite, purely tomato sauce and gelatin in another, and if you still weren't feeling it, you could always just add more sauce. So in other words, it was pretty adaptable. Could you call Southern culture and tradition minimalist? They're so flashy, and they definitely don't cut any corners when it comes to the food. At the same time, I doubt any other area in the States uses their groceries as efficiently as they do. They'll even make things like pickle. Back in the day, pineapple ham rice casserole was the taste of an island getaway, all from the comfort of your dining room. This dish included salty ham, sweet pineapples, and starchy rice to create perhaps one of the most popular and odd-tasting casserole known to date. It may not make much sense today, but back in the more liberated 60s and 70s, a lot of Americans enjoyed sweet and savory flavors, and this rice dish with a tropical twist was familiar to even the most non-island-oriented families. Juicy pineapple helped give the saltiness of the ham, which made me feel like it was a little celebration I was eating. Plus, it was a budget-friendly option that made feeding a family easy, filling, and fun. For potlucks and gatherings, it was a no-brainer, easily recognizable by its bright pineapple and golden brown crust. Unfortunately, pineapple ham rice was outgrown as new varieties of casseroles ascended. Bring it back, and you might find that pineapple and ham really do belong together in this tasty tropical classic. Fried liver mush. This is pretty much the textbook definition of a typical Southern lunch. One more thing that was really popular in the early 20th century was corn. Any kind of corn. Corn flour, corn on the cob, cornmeal. If it had the word in it, it was in most of what you ate, and that's a fact I'll bet money on. This dish is no different because it used pork liver and cornmeal and seasoned it to the moon and back with any kind of spice the chef could get their hands on. Ever wondered where the South got its reputation for loving spicy food? Well, there you go. This and a host of other recipes that pushed the heat to the extreme were big proponents of that idea. Liver mush itself, though, isn't entirely American. It comes from German and African American culture, as it was a very popular way in those cuisines to preserve pork meat and extend its use. This really took off in North Carolina for some reason. Many areas even had their own liver mush festivals and competitions. It's an innovative dish that makes use of pig parts that people would otherwise throw away. and it's a pretty good comfort food if you're into beefy flavor profiles. Sadly, the trend of eating lesser-known parts of the animal has really just died down. People don't look beyond wings, thighs, and breasts. Maybe a neck if they're feeling adventurous. If they're really feeling like getting into some unexplored territory, maybe people would consider a tongue or feet. However, things like broccoli cheese rice casserole is the unsung hero of casseroles, transforming simple ingredients into something irresistibly cheesy and cozy. This takes plain ingredients to a whole new level. Cheesy and delicious, this broccoli cheese rice casserole has it all. It is everything you ever wanted to know about broccoli and cheddar that have come together with the star of the night, rice to feed a large group of people. First seen in kitchens in the 70s, it was a favorite for holiday meals and was a common side dish accompanying roast meats, adding some green to tables which otherwise bore heavy servings of red meat and potatoes. In days of yore, a can of soup would turn up for the simple purpose of chucking it into the creamy sauce, figuring out which brand was cheapest and quickest to prepare. The best part? Even the picky children in the family could not resist the cheese and a relatively bitter broccoli. Like you can quickly tell, it is mere junk food, which it is, but it served as a secret strategy to get kids to eat their greens. While it may have lost some popularity among today's dining scene, broccoli cheese rice casserole should be brought back as a family meal. Add crispy onions on top and you have a good topping change, but use fresh cheese and watch it vanish from the plate as if it were the 70s again. I know you guys will like sweet potato biscuits, but I'm not too sure about the next one. Anyway, staying in the present is good, and right now is all about these biscuits and how they took sweet potatoes, which were already a beloved crop, and combined them with one of the biggest comfort snacks we've ever had. A lot of people have gone to sleep with a slightly less empty stomach thanks to the genius of human creativity that is the biscuit, but when you pair it up with sweet potatoes, it just really rises into another league. This is probably the oldest dish we have so far on the list, though, because it's been dominating Southern tables and been a part of traditional cooking since at least the 1600s, making it around 424 years old as a reasonable guess. That's pretty insane. I think if you had to put any vegetable on the second spot after corn, it would be sweet potatoes. The way you would make these is you'd use mashed sweet potatoes as a base, and then with flour or butter, you'd bake them until they were beautifully golden and had this lovely airy vibe and earthy flavor. It's long been a part of Southern farming because it's one of the most reliable and sustainable crops they have. And while this dish has faded away, a lot of recipes born from sweet potatoes are a key part of the Southern identity. Remember how I said I wasn't sure if you guys would like the next one? Well, how do you feel about some possum for lunch? That's exactly the kind of thing people in the South would get up to eating during the Depression and other economically challenging times. Possum with sweet potatoes was a traditional Southern dish that was either stewed or baked, but always served alongside a heap of sweet potatoes. Mashed potatoes or cutlets or little one-bite potato hotshots. Anything would work, really. The reason people took to eating possum, though, is because, as available as rabbits and squirrels were in most places, there were either some areas that just didn't have a lot of them, or there was a sharp decline in the local wildlife population thanks to the sudden spike in hunting. Plus, a lot of people were used to more unconventional flavors in their protein because they had grown up eating a variety of different kinds of meat, not just chicken, so the shift to possum wasn't exactly too hard on any of them. The way people found out about the magic of possum and sweet potatoes was just nature doing its work, really. Both of them were common leftovers in most households, and eventually people would start combining them. When they found out that these two things just naturally complemented each other, it became a staple recipe in most communities. And speaking of community, there's another reason dishes in general became popular back then. If somebody had a good idea for a plate of food, they'd share it with their neighbors. There would even be communal dinners during the Depression and community cookbooks that held the secrets of one neighborhood and their best dishes. Those kinds of practices are pretty antique now, but it is sweet to think about. Another really important piece of history is it would be crawfish casserole. This dish is pure Louisiana magic, right down to the last bite. Picture crawfish tails, rice, peppers, onions, and a spicy, thick sauce to go with it. Well, it is a casserole, but it has more in common with a seafood crawfish boil than most of the recipes you are likely to come across. Wouldn't you agree? My grandma had a way with this one. She'd add just a pinch of Cajun seasoning that would make you sit up and say, "Oh yeah, that's the good stuff." The crawfish casserole is rich and spicy. However, its creamy base sets it on the path to sinfulness. Okay, let's be real. There is a certain excitement as you eat a dish that comes with crawfish. It's that simple. It's a treat. Plus, casseroles are like magic in the South. When you mix it all together, slide it into the oven until it bubbles, and before you know it, you are not just eating the parts, but so much more. If you enjoy spicy food, if you don't mind a little bit of kick, crawfish casserole will satisfy your taste buds. Let me tell you, people, one spoonful of this dish and you will swear you are sitting in a kitchen in New Orleans, beads and all. Black-eyed peas are more than just a New Year's tradition in the South. They're a way of life. Now turn them into a casserole, and you've got yourself a meal that's so comforting it could cure just about anything. Creamy black-eyed peas, sausage, onions, and peppers wrapped in a spicy sauce and baked to perfection. Well, my grandma used to tell me that you eat black-eyed peas for good luck, but I think they are just simply unbelievably tasty in a wicked kind of way. This is not just a vegetable dish, but rather a whole meal on its own, which can make you very happy after eating it. Rich with the smoky taste of sausages and earthy flavored black-eyed baby peas, every bite is a memorable one. And the best part? It's so easy to whip up. It is not even funny. When my grandma was cooking this recipe, the house would smell like slow-cooked deliciousness, and everyone knew something good was on its way. It's that type of dish that makes me feel like I am at home every time I take a bite of it. But if you have never tasted black-eyed peas in this form, let me assure you, you'll be pleasantly surprised. Sometimes there is nothing like beginning the day by smelling sausage and grits in casserole form and announcing, "Good morning, y'all." Using basic breakfast food items such as grits, sausage, and cheese, you get this hot, filling, and downright delicious one-pot meal. My grandma had some pretty filling breakfasts, with which she made sure that the family was properly taken care of, and this was one of her best. She would prepare it haphazardly the night before, put it into the oven the following morning, and hey presto, breakfast miracle. It's cheesy grits in this casserole, soft and mashed and glorious in that creaminess with the peppery sausage and then the ooey gooey cheese. It's one of those meals that makes you want to grab a second helping and maybe a third. Ideal for a large gathering during breakfast or non-vegetarian brunch, this dish would make your taste buds go berserk. It's that good, a true Southern-style staple. So if you're looking for a way to start your day on a pleasant note, sausage and grits casserole is perfect for you. It's comforting, satisfying, and simply tasty. Believe me, after it, you'll never eat cereal for breakfast again. Of all the Southern dishes out there, curried chicken and rice casserole was more than a simple casserole dish. It was a taste of the overseas in the middle of an important phase in the American food culture that was just starting to step out of its domestic bounding box and sample the world beyond the spice shelf, with black pepper as the ultimate spice. Using tender chicken, fluffy rice, and combining with only a mild curry powder made this casserole a truly warm and comforting meal that had its taste intact. It was creamy, cozy, and added just a hint of change to countless family meals in America. Moreover, preparing it contained all the necessary things in one pan made it the ultimate casserole. Put it in the oven and forget it meal, while giving enough time to disco or watch another episode of MASH. While casseroles have come and gone, this one stuck around a bit longer, loved for its richness and practicality. At some point, though, it disappeared from our tables, outcompeted by a new range of more appealing meals. Who knows, it could possibly become your new favorite weeknight dish. They'll use fatback and collard greens, and if you aren't sure what that is, it's a cut of pork from the very back of the big. It contains an absurd amount of fat, which makes it really ideal for adding flavor and simmering so that whatever else you're cooking it with actually manages to absorb the flavor. The fatback can be chopped or cooked with the greens, or you can slow cook in a broth with them, but either way, you get one of the tastiest recipes surrounding collard greens I've ever seen. There's a reason this thing has lasted as long as it has. You know how you watch those spy or action movies, and there's this one old guy in a field dominated by young men, like a really old hitman? They get that far for a reason, and it's the same for recipes that have actually lasted centuries. Collard greens are already something we're very used to hearing about, but there used to be a lot of variety in how people cooked theirs. The use of fatback was a pretty old tradition, especially in African American cuisine, and on the plus side, it was a really smart way to get your kids to eat more greens because they finally had a tasty way to do it. Thankfully, for our non-meat eater fans or just viewers that don't generally like pork, we can take a bit of a break from it. Beef and rice stuffed peppers were a hit, back when the more you stuffed something, the more your dish can be considered as superior. This dish was a triple win: easy to prepare, healthy, tasty, and gorgeous to look at. Ideal for family meals and for potluck. The edible bowls, green bell peppers filled with a filling of ground beef, rice, tomatoes, and spices of choice. The result? A delicious meal with a lot of flavors and appeal, which was also colorful, satisfying, and reasonably cheap to make. During the 70s and the 80s, different stuffed peppers were popular because they served a complete meal in a neatly arranged parcel. Who wouldn't want to get a hold of a perfectly roasted pepper with its delicious filling overflowing on the sides? Depending on whether the peppers were loaded with cheesy goodness or breadcrumb toppings for a last-minute crisp, beef and rice stuffed peppers are the true blue meal prep, ready to serve hot or cold or warmed up as a reheated meal the following day. Today, they are a little less common on the dinner table, and they should be returned back to it. This dish doesn't just look great, but it can create a very healthy meal out of rice and beef. Try it. You will find out why such peppers used to dominate home kitchen preparation from long ago. Cajun dirty rice may not be the prettiest dish, but it definitely put some flavor into my bowl. A signature of Louisiana's Cajun cooking, this dish combines rice with ground meat, usually pork or chicken livers, green peppers, onions, and a host of spices to create something truly mouth-watering. This is where the dirty comes from, because the meat and spices make the rice very brown. Dirty rice has roots in Creole cuisine, where no part of the animal went to waste, and every bite was packed with flavor. It is a very down-home type dish, but not overly spicy, which I know some people don't like in their food. This dish goes back to the southern region's historical usage of this type of food because of its simplicity, inexpensive, and rich in flavor. It is hot, tasty, and very filling, can be eaten as a meal, and is also complimenting when served alongside grilled meats. While not as prevalent as it is in Louisiana, dirty rice is a recipe that should be resurrected if you are a fan of fulfilling dishes. Add in a pinch more of cayenne for a twist of the nouveau cuisine, and let this dish bring you a dirty truth that sometimes the best recipes are dirty. Who could have known how interesting old-school dinners were? Which tradition do you think should be revived? Comment down below and don't forget to like and subscribe.